Before I went to each local bar visit, I would call and talk to the local president. I would also talk to the person that was most involved in access to justice in that area to get a good sense of the different programs that existed around the state. And the reason we did that is in April of 2012, we put together a strategic planning conference, and we had 60 bar leaders come from around the whole state and Denver metro area. And we sent out a survey asking them what they thought, what were the things that you think the Bar Association can accomplish over the next 2 to 3 years, concrete goals. So Terry Ruckriegel, who's the president-elect, he'll take over July 1st. We put it together because we wanted to have continuity on it. We sent out the survey. When we do the Board of Governors meeting every 6 months, we usually break up into roundtables, and we had all the notes from those roundtables for the last 2 or 3 years. We went through all of those notes, and we solicited opinions from folks about what they would like to see accomplished. So we got everybody together in a room, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, today's apparently the transitional day between heat and air conditioning in this room. You might have thought we did it for the lawyers we honored, just so they remembered what it was like, in the old courthouses, this is exactly what it was like in the old courthouse. So we did the strategic planning conference. We spent an afternoon in this room together, and we had 20 very concrete goals that we had developed from all the information we had. And then we went through all of them, and we had people flesh them out. What do they mean? What common definition do we have? And at the end of that, we said you get 5 votes. And your first vote gets 5 points, your second vote gets 4 points, your third vote, etc. And so that has a tendency, when you have a larger group, to bring to the top those things that the group really wants to try to do together over the next couple of years. Access to justice rose right to the top. I mean, out of probably the top 5, 6, 7 things, access to justice issues were the top 3. And that's clearly a product of, one, the huge cutbacks that have occurred with John's program. I thought I said John earlier. Colorado Legal Services, plus the local Bar Association programs. We've got to find another model on having to fund these programs other than having to rely on state and federal funding. It's just not going to work anymore. The other thing is this large issue about really about 70%, they estimate, of the population who do not qualify for the indigency programs, yet certainly cannot afford to litigate any kind of case that really would be $100,000 or more. There's this large part of the American population that just can't afford the American judicial system. So there is a lot of discussion about how do we address that. And so there's issues of doing sliding scale, doing unbundled legal services, doing limited scope of representation, meaning simply that, if Charlie comes to me and says, I've got this case I want you to handle, involving this $200,000 contract. Okay, the way we were raised is I bought that case. I'm responsible for every aspect of that case. I stay up at night and I worry about every piece of it. Unbundled legal services, Charlie comes into me and says, I have a mediation on this contract case tomorrow. And I'd either, one, like for you to walk through for me what I need to do to prepare for this mediation, so I'd like an hour or 2 hours of your time, or Charlie says, I'd like for you to attend this one mediation with me after I talk to you a little bit more about the case. So he effectively takes 2 or 3 hours of my attorney time and pays me for that, and I handle that very limited portion of the case. Very scary. People worry about it from a professional liability standpoint, but it is something that is not only going to happen, it is happening. And domestic relations lawyers are really probably the ones that are using it more than anybody else. So, commercial litigation is also being used, but it's going to start becoming used in a lot more areas. And we've got to learn not to be afraid of it and learn to start embracing it. The legislature agreed to fund, I think it was 13 pro se help centers this past year. So these are people that are not lawyers who will be sitting in the courthouses so that when litigants or possible litigants come in, they can go to this Pro Se Help Center, they can get the forms they need, they can get perhaps a little bit of advice on how to handle things, and they're going to expand that to probably another 5 positions this year. I go to all the Access to Justice Committee meetings. It's great, I get it. It's a way of trying to deal with the 65% increase in pro se litigation over the last 5 years in Colorado. But I got to tell you, at the end of hearing those discussions, I say the lawyers are being left in the proverbial barn because we're not figuring out a way to complement this system. And so what we've got to do is come up with a combination between these pro se help centers, pro se litigation, but lawyers finding a way to provide competent representation as a complement to those centers so that we're not, one, it's so much more helpful to a judge. If a woman comes in or a man comes in and says, I need back payments on child payments, these are the 4 elements you have to prove. They go through the first 3, they can't prove the 4th. The judge can't say, well, you need to do this in order to get that. So the case just ends up getting dismissed and 45 minutes of time is wasted by the court. If that person had the chance to talk to a lawyer for maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes or a half an hour, that would have been successfully concluded and there would not have been the waste of judicial resources. So we got to figure out how to advance the ball on that. That all clearly rose to the top of the things that folks wanted to accomplish. The other things we heard were the classic things you hear that we've heard for the last 10, 15 years. Professionalism, the incivility, people not treating each other in the profession with respect. Work-life balance. I've got this firm I'm at, 2,200 hours is the minimum billable hour. I've got 3 kids at home, help me, kind of thing. And then the other thing you always hear is, the public, we just have such a bad view of us as attorneys. Help us fix that image with the public. So, a lot of them are tilting at windmills, but a lot of them are things that we actually can do different things about. And so what we did in response to this strategic planning is we started several programs over the last year, all of which I believe either have been successfully concluded or are nearing the stages of conclusion. The first thing we really set out to do was to finish the mentor program. So we had the statewide CBA mentoring program that was started about 1.5 years ago. We have about 1/3 of our lawyers who are not finding traditional legal jobs, who are going out and hanging up a shingle. And so they don't have direction or anybody to go to talk to. Those lawyers don't usually get sued over cases because quite frankly their cases are not that large that somebody brings a legal malpractice. They have a tendency to get grieved. And it can be something like a cold tap account, something that somebody else can help them very readily about. So part of this mentor program was geared toward assisting those attorneys who really don't have any place to turn. But remarkably, the program also, there were a lot of lawyers who are in firms that really just wanted to have somebody outside of their firm or another part of practice they could talk to. I personally have mentored 4 people since the DBA program began. All of them have been women, all of them have been in firms other than my own, because I was in private practice for 32 years. And all of them really wanted to learn litigation. And so the last thing I did was we had a jury selection up in Boulder on a case, and we went up for the afternoon, and I said, these are the 10 things I try to accomplish in jury selection. Happened to be plaintiff's lawyer and then first defense lawyer that we were able to watch. And we'd take a break on the hour, and I'd say, okay, with regard to the 10 things we talked about, what would you do? And so it was great. I mean, just understanding her instincts and discussing those things. So that's the type of things we do in the mentoring program. It's really been concluded to a large extent from the Bar Association standpoint because, one, we convinced the Supreme Court to hire an executive director of the program. And so they hired John Baker, who's been a longtime instructor at NIDA, very active in the bar. John was around here today. And John is happy. I just saw him and he said, I didn't realize how much fun it was going to be for me to do this. And so he is meeting with groups all over the state, the program we have set up, and we've got somebody that's being paid in the state of Colorado, and we have placed a huge value on mentoring, and that's an important part of our practice. And I think John's going to do great at that program. The second thing that we started, John Vaught here? I saw John earlier. Nope. So the other thing we started was the Colorado Lawyers for Colorado Veterans. We started that on November 11th of 2011. And we modeled it off a Texas program. The Young Lawyers Division got involved. I know Charlie was very involved in it. I don't know anybody else here that was really involved with it. But John Vaught and Ben Courier co-chaired the program. We have now established 6 ongoing clinics in Colorado. We've got one, I think, in Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, Denver, Boulder, Glenwood, Grand Junction, and then we're just starting one down in San Luis Valley, and we're going to start one in the northeast part of Colorado, and then Boulder Law School is always going to also have one for the students on the campus in Boulder. So we have good geographic distribution around the state. We've already assisted about 300 veterans through these clinics, and we have 200 lawyers and judges who have volunteered to give assistance to these veterans, and about 50 or 60 of those volunteers have said they will take a pro bono case if the circumstances require it after the vet is at the clinic. Biggest thing I learned from that whole thing, and that's pretty much up and running, and we're now talking about, it's a standalone project, and we are now talking about the possibility of creating a veterans assistance section so that we have a place for this program to be and for there to be other programs that we can develop for veterans. They project that Douglas County and Arapahoe County, part of Denver, and certainly El Paso are going to have some of the highest populations in the country of vets that have been discharged. And many of these vets, because of the type of combat they went through, a lot of traumatic brain injury. And so they have very unique issues that they have to deal with beyond just disability. Biggest thing I learned about this is, it's so hard with pro bono programs because it is a very huge time commitment on taking on a case. And a lot of times, we don't feel the empathy for the people that are part of the program. That's really a common problem in a lot of segments of our culture. The one thing this program taught me is, boy, if you can really get people to see a bond between who you're working with and who that attorney is, vets have an incredible bond with each other, and people that were not vets have an incredible gratitude for people that have served. I've never had a program where I've had people come to me and say, I want to be part of that. Can I do pro bono work? And we need to instill that same type of mentality in other aspects of our pro bono practices, but that's been a real eye-opener. So that's been largely accomplished. The other thing we started was a modest means task force that Judge Taubman and John Zackham are co-chairing. And the purpose of this is to try to provide to lawyers the resources on how to obtain and retain a middle-class clientele. And this is everything from how do you screen for a client, how do you do unbundled legal services, how do you keep your overhead down to such a point that you can actually charge a rate that people can afford that are in the middle class. And so we're putting together a toolkit that will actually be available for lawyers to be able to use as a resource in developing this type of practice. We're about halfway through those sessions now. The toolkit will be finished by the time I finish my presidency on June 30th, and I know Terry Ruckriegel will pick up the ball from there. And then the last thing that we have is on the work-life balance. And so with Barb Ezek, and Barb is the Executive Director of the Colorado Lawyers Assistance Program. Barb, you want to stand up? I'm not sure everybody knows So Barb is a lawyer, but she's also among the anointed, and she's a nurse as well. So Barb, and a DBA member. It's actually cool over here.
I know.
Good spot. All right. So Barb really has a lot of insight and skill and expertise on addressing issues that face professionals everywhere from burnout to substance abuse to boundary issues. You know, there's a similar corollary that I've worked with for years in the healthcare profession called Colorado Physicians Health Program. This is a program that is somewhat similar to that, but also has its own. So we started a pilot program with about 30 or 35 lawyers, probably about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and it's a 6-part series really to kind of address a lot of the different things we have to deal with. The first one started out with healthy mind, healthy body, and it was actually fascinating. We had a psychiatrist talk on the bad stuff that gets generated in our system from chronic stress and the good stuff that goes away because of chronic stress, and how you actually develop negative and positive neural pathways based upon us negatively thinking about things all the time. So it was really a fascinating subject. People loved it. Last time we had Reva from the Bar Association come out, and she talked about quelching the digital fire hose. So a lot of very practical things on, you know, how do you take care of these 125 emails that you get a day? How can you organize them? So some very concrete things. What are we doing tomorrow, Barb?
We're doing meditation. And it is very timely because some of the comments we got after the last one was, how do I shut it off? And it's like, you know, really, if we have to tell you how to shut off your cell phone at night, there's a problem. But it dawned on me, I'm like, well, yeah, meditation. And actually, for lawyers, the legal profession, we do really well with meditation. So they're actually in for a big treat because they're actually going to do a meditation exercise, and they're going to learn about meditation. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow, and I understand you're not going to be there.
No, I'm going to be in Hawaii. My sister, my daughter, and my wife.
He deserves it.
Yeah.
It's okay. So
So
we're excited for that one.
We are. So I call it kind of find your zen in the sense of meditation or yoga or fly fishing, which is really good too. Right. Or going to Hawaii. Right. But if anybody's interested, we do them at Copic, which is where I work now. We do them at Copic once a month. And, you know, we just had 30, 35 lawyers who said they'd agree. If you'd like to come, you're more than welcome to come. We really want good comments about this because we want to see is it something to replicate, that to be provided to other lawyers throughout the state. I think it's very helpful information. I'm usually convinced that skill sets can be learned on dealing with these things. So when I went across the state, what I did was I talked about the core value, what I perceive to be the core values of the profession. And I asked people, I said, so after I do this talk on core values, I'm going to ask you, what do you think culturally and professionally have impacted our core values, both good and bad? I am going to talk, I'm only going to go to 6, so I'm going to do a hard stop. I am going to talk about the core values, but I'm not going to do this interactive session that I've done throughout the state. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it because it's very interesting. So, what do I think to be the first and number one core value of our professional identity? Certainly, it's service to clients. And a story that I've told throughout the state is that I had a physician client who called me and said, you know, my son's thinking about being a lawyer, he's in the 10th grade of high school, you know, would you be willing to let him shadow with you? And I said, sure. So I called up an old partner of mine, Ed Bronfin, who sits on the bench in Denver. Ed's great about people coming into his courtroom. So Ed said, yeah. I said, so what do you got going that day? So I think I got a murder PH, and of course, you know, go over there, sure. So Ed makes a big deal, because you come in, you sit in the back of the courtroom, and Ed, you walk in, and Ed says, Mr. Fogg, come on up and bring your guest up and sit in the jury box, you know, and everything. So of course, you know, big deal, and the kid's loving it. And then Ed's explaining to him how now they can put these bracelets on the prisoners, and they use like a taser type thing from across the room and everything. And you know, he's loving all this stuff. Anyway, shouldn't go into that. And so while we're in the courtroom, this is a criminal courtroom. And so I was a DA I was in the DA's office in Denver from 77 to 85. And the last time I had been in a criminal courtroom beyond about 15 minutes was that day. And so I saw the wheeling and dealing that was going on, and I really wasn't seeing much as a civil litigator. And about halfway through the afternoon, there was this man that came to the podium, stood next to the podium. You knew there was going to be a lawyer coming up, but the man stood there by himself for about a half a minute. Latino, probably about 42, 43, visibly shaking while standing at the podium. You could see the nervousness he felt. Lawyer comes up, stands next to him, and then they start telling the story, through this sentencing hearing that I'm about to listen to. So, father of three, sounds like nothing on his record, not even a serious traffic ticket, ever been in trouble. Pound of cocaine found in the car. He was a passenger. Sounds like there was some kind of fake story told right at the beginning. So, did not do well with law enforcement when they first met. Wife is in the back of the courtroom, very gently sobbing, very appropriately. So I guess what I'm trying to paint is in this usual everyday courtroom in Denver, there was just this real sense of pathos that existed in this courtroom. And so this lawyer comes up, guy I never saw before, and I still don't know his name. He comes up and, he gives the type of argument to the court that litigators, transactional lawyers, and love. It's not the judge, let me tell you, or judge, this is what's right. It's judge, let me help you make the right decision. Let me provide you facts and information by which you can come around to make the right decision. And he went through and did a very orderly, logically, passionate, compassionate talk on advocacy for why this man should get probation when the district attorney is asking for prison time based upon the amount of cocaine involved. And no kidding, I'm a blooded DA, 8 years in the trenches. I was on the edge of my seat after this guy finished as to what Judge Bronfman was going to do with this. And Judge Bronfman ended up giving him probation with some very wise conditions. But I went home that night and it really caused me to reflect upon, I think it was the everyday aspect of it that really kind of crept into my consciousness. And I said, we lawyers, we are belittled so many times and in so many different ways that sometimes we just don't appreciate the substantial impact. No matter if you're an attorney general, if you're criminal defense, if you're real estate, if you're civil litigator, no matter what you do in this profession, you have a tremendous impact on other human beings. You have a legal, ethical, and moral obligation to place the good of another above your own. And that is a very, very cool way to spend this existence that you have upon this earth. And you should take great honor in the fact that you are attorneys and that you are having this type of impact on other human beings. So, I suggest that that is our number one core value. Second is access to justice, and we've talked about that a bit. We hear all these terms, access to justice, pro bono, sliding scale. From my vantage point of hearing all these concepts, I think it all boils down to how much as a lawyer do you truly carry in your heart the importance of the rule of law? And realizing what that really means, that every person in our society has a right to some form of competent representation. Otherwise, the system does not work. And realizing that 90% of the world, plus, does not have a meaningful rule of law. My youngest son is adopted from the Philippines, and we go back there with some regularity. And the last time we were back there, we had a driver that was taking us around Manila, and he just said, oh, he said, my cousin's going to be a lawyer. I'm sorry, my cousin's a lawyer, he's going to be a judge. I said, oh. He said, yeah, he's going to be able to make 10 times what he did as a lawyer. I said, wow, I got a different system than we do. And so we talked a little bit more, and of course the reason he's going to make 10 times as much money is through bribes and corruption. So the view in the Philippines is, once you become a public figure, you now got it made, because you're now going to make your fortune, because you now can be bribed and all those things. That's the way the rest of the world lives. And we forget that. And so that's why all of the conversation about unbundled legal services and limited scope, not everybody in our culture is going to be able to have representation throughout a case. But we need to figure out a way that they're going to get what they need in some form of competent representation, or the system does not work. The third core value is professionalism. And John Baker was largely my mentor in this area. He called me and asked me to be part of the Metro conciliation panel, and judges would refer lawyers to us who couldn't get along, and we'd try to get them together and talk about it. And I'm a huge believer that in 90% of the cases where lawyers are not getting along, it's because they assume the worst about the other lawyer. You want to have the deposition at your office because it's a territoriality thing, and you're trying to really play my client down, and it's a turf battle, when in actuality it's probably because the guy's got 8 boxes and he doesn't really want to tout them over to the other office. But we always assume the worst evil motivations. And as I wrote in a recent article, I think lawyers used to approach each other with a first position of trust. And to some extent, that's become reversed. That oftentimes we approach lawyers initially with a sense of distrust. No two ways about it. People have earned my distrust over the years. And I'm not a Pollyanna. I litigated for 30 years. And I know that there is a small percentage of our bar, our practice, who are frankly bullies. They learned early on to be a bully, and they got some results, and in a Pavlovian way, they continued that bully practice. They need, frankly, to go out in the desert and die. We need to ostracize them. They should not be part of our practice. I'm always the armchair psychiatrist who believes, okay, they've got some heavy insecurity problems. That's really why they're a bully. Maybe true or not. But in any event, sad to say, we can't change the 45-year-old or the 48-year-old. They've learned their way. So all we can do is go to the younger lawyers, to the law schools, and say, look, when you have things that are presented to you, you have skill sets that you can use. Instead of using the volcanic, vitriolic language of, Nick, you're late today, you're always late, not only are you always late, your firm's always late, and your mother's always late. That's how lawyers talk to each other. We escalate beyond. And that's a simple skill set. Handle the problem at issue, and you don't need to go beyond that. So, and I think the law schools have made a huge progression. In 2007, the law schools got lambasted by the Carnegie Foundation for not providing enough experiential education. They really have tried to come around and change that. I literally recall when I was chair of the Professionalism Committee about 10, 12 years ago, we go into the law schools and we teach on professionalism. And I remember calling a professor who will go unnamed and is no longer there. I said, look, we'd love to come into your class and teach on professionalism. And no kidding, his response was, we don't teach manners in law school. And so very inappropriately, I responded, apparently not. But I think things have become much better. We're getting a lot of calls from the law school. Dean Weiser and Dean Katz, I think, are doing God's work in the law schools. So, professionalism. And then the final core value that I think is important is community service. And I place that different than pro bono. Pro bono are obligations we have with regard to the profession. Community service ties more into the work-life balance issue. to get perspective on your practice and perspective on yourselves. I teach a lot to the first-year law students, and I say, look, going into law school is like catching a runaway freight train. And every transition you have in your career, from law student to lawyer, from associate to shareholder with 6 kids, every one of them, it's a freight train for a short period of time. But after you kind of get through the freight train, you need to find that balance. And so even in law school, you need to find the balance of what community service can I do? How can I give back? I'm so lucky. I'm a lawyer in the best legal system that has ever existed on the face of the planet. I'm extremely lucky. How can I give back? Because quite frankly, as beautiful as the profession is, if you don't do community service, the profession will suck the soul out of you and you will lose all perspective of yourself. So I think community service is also a very important core value of our profession. It struck me as I was doing these talks, you know, we're in the 3rd largest revolution we've ever been in. You know, agrarian, industrial, and now the informational revolution. We're really struggling and trying to see how are our core values going to survive this totally unique informational revolution. The biggest complaint throughout the state I heard from every lawyer was the digitalization of our culture, the emails, the overload of information. I never talked to other lawyers. And so there's ways that we have to try to keep our advocacy skills up and running and our ability to communicate without this depersonalization that takes place with our digitalization. So that's what I've talked throughout the state. I've loved it. I'm not going to force you into interaction session. It's too hot. So I'm going to leave you with one final remark. So there was a young Greek student who got through law school, took the bar exam, passed the bar, and was sworn in. And his very proud Greek father comes up to him, physician, Greek father, comes up to him and says, Axios, Axios. So everybody looks around, what does Axios mean? And the Greek father says, Axios has 2 meanings. He said the first meaning of Axios is, you are worthy. So just like you, people who have excelled in their lives, you've excelled in education, you've excelled in your social skills, you've excelled in your practice. You are worthy to be attorneys and to carry these values with you. But he said the second meaning of Axios is be worthy. So that means as you go forward, continue those values, and as importantly, make sure you pass those values on to those younger lawyers who you mentor. God bless.